Welcome to Leveraging Inspiration, the Inspired Patent Podcast, where we help you understand and leverage your intellectual property. I'm your host, Wayne Carroll, and I'm excited to bring you insights and stories from the success and failures of others and teach you how to win at the game of intellectual property. I'm joined here today with Shawnna Riggers from Arizona Family Law Attorneys. And before we get started, we need to have a disclaimer since we're both attorneys. The information we provide on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. We are not providing legal advice, and nothing in this podcast should be construed as creating an attorney-client relationship. Welcome, Shawnna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We've heard a lot about ChatGPT, and is that going to replace attorneys?
From a personal experience on the other side, we represent one parent. The other parent's been using a lot of ChatGPT to write their emails to us. And unfortunately, they're getting some misinformation. They really believe that ChatGPT told them that in Arizona, they don't have to cover any birth-related costs for their child because that's what ChatGPT told them. At least for right now, it's not working 100%. They do a disclaimer that says, I'm not a lawyer. You should consult with a lawyer before making any specific decisions or taking positions. Even ChatGPT itself is saying, hey, you probably need to consult with a lawyer. I'm not worried that it's going to replace me, and quite frankly, at the years of experience I have working with judges, ChatGPT is never going to get that, right? They're never going to have that experience or context of what goes on inside the courtroom. They might be able to review hundreds and thousands of pages of written legal documents, but that is no substitute for someone who is going to actually lead you through the process with insights.
Yeah, I did a podcast on ChatGPT. ChatGPT actually makes stuff up. I was looking up a law and it quoted a law. So I searched the internet for that quote. I'm not going to rely on ChatGPT. I'm the subject matter expert. It had quote marks around it. It did not exist on the internet. Of course, I looked specifically at the law, and there's sometimes notes in the law. That wasn't anywhere. It made it up. They actually call that hallucinating. That's one of the known problems with AI. It says, I think I need a quote here. Okay, what would be a good quote? It makes it up. There are a lot of great uses. I use it to help me on this podcast a lot to summarize things. I use the AI to help me write marketing pieces, but I review it carefully. And if I ever use it for anything legal, I'm especially careful. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, and one other thing to add is that when you're taking a position with the court, whether it's in family law, which is what I do, or in litigation that you might be involved in, or other attorneys, you have to make sure that you're taking a reasonable position. If you're relying on ChatGPT to tell you what your position should be, and that's wrong, you could be subject to pretty substantial sanctions from the court. You want to make sure that you really do have a good understanding of what you're doing before you submit anything that ChatGPT has provided to you to the court.
All right. Thank you. So this podcast is directed towards business owners and helping them build their business and protect their intellectual property. In divorce cases, since that's what you handle primarily, are there issues that deal with businesses and things that can go wrong?
Absolutely. The first thing that needs to be determined if there is a business amongst a married couple, is the business actually community property? Meaning, was the business started after the parties were legally married? The date of the marriage after, unless you have a prenuptial agreement, Arizona law is going to say that is a community business. Then that is going to need to be divided. It doesn't matter if one spouse is the one that was working in the business every day and the other spouse had a different job and didn't work in the business, or was a stay-at-home parent and took care of the kiddos. It doesn't matter. If it's community property, it's going to need to be divided.
Okay. So if a business was started before the marriage, but there's somebody actually working in the business, it's not just an ownership position, how does that work out with community property?
So there's also this tricky concept of goodwill. How much goodwill was put into the business by the spouse during the marriage. And so there's an argument that could then still be a community asset, even though the community doesn't own the business. There's also the earnings of the business, depending on how that works, depending on where those earnings were deposited, how that person is paid during the marriage. And so it can get really very complicated. I highly recommend, even though my firm doesn't personally do this, that if you have a business prior to getting married, that you consult with a family law attorney and have a prenuptial agreement drafted so that there's no confusion as to what would happen in the event of a dissolution. And everyone knows that approximately half of the marriages end in divorce. And so you have to be smart about protecting yourself and your assets. It doesn't mean that you don't believe in your marriage. It just means that you understand what the ramifications of Arizona community property law could be in the event that your marriage ends in divorce.
Okay. So another way to look at it from a business aspect is if you don't do this prenuptial agreement, you're going to spend a lot of money if the marriage ends trying to figure these things out. But if you just say, okay, let's set a basis over here, you're going to save money in the event that you get divorced, likely save money. Nothing's guaranteed.
Correct. And then on the other example, if you start a business after your marriage has begun, right? Unless you and your wife or husband or partner are going to be equally working in this business, if one of you is the person who's really working in the business, and let's say you have another partner that's outside the relationship, when you're drafting your business documents, your operating agreement, your LLC agreement, you need to have your spouse sign a disclaimer. And that can be done through just your business attorney. You don't need a separate divorce attorney. This is a pretty standard practice when you work with a lawyer to set up a new business, but it avoids the issue of an outside partner having to become partners with the spouse in the event of a divorce. And so when you're creating a business, it's something that you really need to consider on what that's going to look like, not just the value, but what could potentially happen in the event of a dissolution.
Just to make sure it's clear, you need an attorney that is licensed in the state.
So if you are going to get divorced, if it's Arizona, there's a 90-day residency period. If one of the spouses has resided in Arizona, you can file for divorce. It gets a lot more complicated if you have minor children, which is not the purpose of this podcast, so I won't go into that. But you want to make sure that you do speak with an attorney to make sure that you're filing your case in the right place, because jurisdiction is the number one thing that has to be figured out. And depending on the situation, if it's subject matter jurisdiction and the court doesn't have it, they could have given you an entire divorce, and then the whole divorce is void if Arizona never had jurisdiction in the first place to issue those orders. So you want to make sure that it's done properly. But typically it's where the family lives is where the divorce would need to take place. That's why it's important to get real legal advice. There's lots of factors that need to be taken into consideration, but there's lots of business owners that live in one place and have a business in another place, or they have multiple locations in multiple different states. So it can be a really very complicated legal process that you want to make sure that you're getting sophisticated legal advice for.
Okay. I also want to take a few minutes and ask, what makes your law practice different? Your website talks about peace of mind, there is no substitute, and that you have a unique legal approach. Can you share that with us?
I can, but a quick plug for Wayne. He helped us register that trademark years ago, and it has served us so well, and he makes sure that we get that renewed on time. So thank you again. But just like every attorney, we have our own individual style. And so at our firm, we want to help our clients by providing them with basically all the options, just like we've talked about, and then we let them decide what it is that they want to do. And the majority of our practice involves also setting up parenting plans. Our approach to how we handle matters with children is a lot different than other places. We want to focus on the children's long-term well-being, put a plan in place that's going to last the parties, and also give them reasonable advice about what positions a judge might find persuasive and which ones might put you in the very unreasonable category and possibly down the road of sanctions. And I think a lot of other firms just say, oh, this is what you want. Okay, I'll go ahead and write that down. And that doesn't really serve any purpose other than the law firm making more money because it just continues to add to litigation. And when you're working with families, reaching a quick conclusion so that people can move on to the next chapter of their life really is in the entire family's best interest. And that's what we're focused on, is putting them in a great position to move forward so that they have peace of mind that their futures are going to be secure.
Okay. Yeah. So you don't just make a decision and go forward. You basically make proposals and then get the client's sign off on what the proposal is before you file it.
Absolutely. Yeah. In family law, no attorney should go forward, of course, without their client's signature and having a good set game plan. But unfortunately, sometimes that does still happen. But when it's matters involving someone's family, it's their finances, it's retirement, bank accounts, parenting time schedules, what are holidays going to look like, what schools are the kids going to go to if we sell the house. There are so many things that are really important that need to be thoughtfully planned out and proposed.
Okay. And why did you choose to become a family law attorney?
So when I first went to college, of course, people change their majors, but I thought that I wanted to go into the medical field. And it turns out if there's one drop of blood, you better get me a chair and some juice. So that I found out very quickly wasn't where I needed to go. I am good with working with people who might be going through a crisis. And without sounding dramatic, like a divorce for some people is a crisis, right? They might not have been expecting it, or they don't know how they're going to fund their future. And so I find a lot of value in what I do every day by helping people move through that, finding them solutions and getting them on a new path to their future. So it's a very fulfilling career for me to help them through a really difficult time in their life. And also just showing people that it doesn't have to be as bad as it looks like on the internet or the horror story that you heard from your friend. A lot of these issues can be resolved by having a good lawyer on your side.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. We're out of time, and thank you for joining us, Shawnna. We have been on Leveraging Inspiration podcast. You can find the podcast wherever you find your podcasts. Please subscribe, and thank you for joining us.